No man must have this kind of power. I feel like I gotta set the record straight. The M4 Max MacBook Pro is so stupidly powerful that it's practically useless for most of us. Now, this might sound like a trigger point for some of you people out there saying, how dare you? But it's not an insult to the MacBook Pro. Really, it's the highest form of compliment. See, you might think as tech reviewers, we're immune to making silly tech decisions like buying a product we might not fully utilize. But the truth is, me and my tech brethren are just as gullible, in fact, if not probably more gullible than most of you. And we often end up kind of overselling ourselves on stuff we don't need. And for me, the MacBook Pro has been a daily driver and a fantastic one at that. But the truth is, if you just want to know this part, I don't really need a M4 Max. However, I've spent enough time with it to make a genuine long-term review of exactly what this beast is capable of, and also to give you a pretty good idea of exactly what the latest generation MacBook Pro is all about, and what honestly makes it such a top-tier machine despite the costly Apple tax you might be paying on top. So let's get into it. Let's start with design, since after all, that is the most familiar territory. I mean, Apple is now using this design for the 4th generation in a row, originally introduced with the M1 Pro MacBook Pros. Since then, Apple hasn't changed much, but that's not really a bad thing. I think the MacBook Pro has one of the most graceful designs, and it's probably the most utilitarian looking laptop Apple has produced in the history of its laptops. Again, a total compliment. Also, it is an entirely premium slab of engineering. I mean, you've got a complete metallic exterior. It is one of the handful of laptops in the world that does not have an air intake vent at the bottom. Rather, it's well placed at the sides, so you can actually use your laptop on your lap. Something that you would think would be kind of obvious to laptop manufacturers, but it is costly to engineer, so here we are. Now, of course, the laptop does have a weight of 3.4 pounds, which, while not the lightest, isn't too bad given the build quality of this 14-inch machine. As far as I/O is concerned, I think the MacBook Pro is a pretty reasonable laptop. On one side, you do have the proprietary MagSafe 3 charging port, you get 2 Thunderbolt 5 ports, and the good old headphone jack. On the other side, you have a HDMI 2.1 port, one more Thunderbolt 5 port, and all three of these Thunderbolt 5 ports do have power delivery and DisplayPort certification. And then, of course, you have a full-sized SD card reader. When you unfold this laptop, a little detail that we often take for granted is the fact that you can open it up with a single hand without the base or the body flipping over. Even some of the most expensive premium PC laptops often don't have this weight balancing. And again, something we kind of take for granted. The inner metallic chassis here, again, I really love it in that silver color. It's very consistent, it feels premium, and it's top tier build quality. I also like the way you have the speaker insertions on either corner there. But my favorite thing here is undoubtedly the trackpad. You've got plenty of serve real estate, a pristine glass surface. You've got haptic feedback technology, so every click feels like you're tapping on thin ice. It's subtle but impactful. And of course, the fact that you have multi-gesture support means you can do so many cool things with macOS as long as you're using a trackpad on your MacBook. Moving on to the keyboard, I do think that the MacBook Pro keyboard is probably the most overhyped thing out there. I mean, sure, it has a nice contrast with that black tone. However, these keycaps are prone to attracting all sorts of oil and moisture buildup, which makes your keyboard look hideous after a short-term use. And if you have OCD like me, you'll frequently find yourself cleaning up the keyboard. Now, with that said, you do have a pretty nice backlit system. It's auto-sensing, which is of course convenient. And then Touch ID is a lifesaver. It's convenient for logging in and all sorts of other applications. The typing experience, again, overhyped in my opinion. I do believe the likes of Dell's XPS and Lenovo's Yoga series have vastly superior keyboards. They have more key travel, they're more tactile, and they honestly just feel better overall. Despite that though, typing on here is a pretty decent experience and makes for a good productivity keyboard. The display fitting on the MacBook is up to modern day standards. You do have a full glass encasing all around for a unified look. I will mention that you have a bit of a noticeable chin at the bottom, but it's not too dramatic all things considered. You have nice narrow side bezels that are immersive and look gorgeous. And then of course at the top you have a very thin forehead. That's until you get to the notch. And the notch has never bothered me, honestly. I think it's a practical enough application. At the center you have a high quality 12 megapixel webcam, and you can do up to full HD video recording with it. I honestly believe the MacBook has the best non-OLED display in the market even today. I mean, you've got a crisp 14-inch panel with a 3024 by 1964 native resolution, a 254 pixels per inch density. You've also got ProMotion with up to 120 Hz of refresh rate, and of course, you get 1000 nits of peak brightness with SDR content, and that number goes up to 1600 nits with HDR content. You also get a nice, clean 100% DCI-3 color rating, making this a fantastic laptop for color sensitive and creative activities alike. Now, one thing that, kind of has everyone on the edge is whether the glossy display is better or the nano texture display. So I opted for the glossy display. I like the more natural look of it despite the added glare that comes on the screen. I think the brightness more than makes up for it. I tried the nano texture display with the M4 MacBook Pro that I reviewed a couple months ago. I'm not a big fan of it. I don't like the gray tint that kind of comes all over your screen. I feel like it takes away from the clarity of the display. Some people strongly disagree with me and think the anti-glare benefits actually outweigh that little minor inconvenience. Let me know which one you think is better. There's no wrong answer, but I am genuinely curious about your thoughts. A quick recap of the technical specifications. So we do have the unbinned version of the M4 Max, which means we get the 16-core CPU, the 40-core GPU. I also opted to get 64 gigabytes of unified memory, and we do have the base 1 terabyte storage option. Now, it's worth noting that I do use my MacBook Pro entirely as my daily driver. In fact, 80% of the times it's used as a desktop right here on my desk, so it's in dock mode. And regardless of how I'm using it, I've never really maxed it out. I mean, obviously doing general things like surfing the web and multimedia content will be as smooth on this MacBook as it would be on a M1 MacBook Air. Like, that's just a fact of it. Watching 4K content, again, it's going to be non-distinguishable between various generations using the M series chips. Even in doing slightly more advanced productivity like programming, again, everyday or general programming is not going to push this device in the slightest. It'll work just as smooth as it would on a M4 Pro or even the base M4 chip, and with nominal differences. Having additional memory in my case does have minor benefits. You can have more code compilation going on with slightly faster results. However, when you do more graphically intense things like running Blender, for example, if you have enough elements, you will find the 38-core GPU tends to load those elements ever so slightly faster. The difference is marginal when compared to a M4 Pro chip, but again, those extra GPU cores do have a minor benefit in that situation. Now, when you do the most intensive workflows, for my case anyway, which is having multiple 4K footage stacked up, it's all 10-bit footage, it is fully color graded, and I add in heavy effects like the Enhancer Pro, for example, alongside, of course, color grading it and fine-tuning it further. I find that I can comfortably stack 4 to 5 layers before I would notice even a 1% frame drop while running everything in real time. And the Enhancer Pro is a very heavy and unoptimized plugin, but the M4 Max absolutely champions it. The M4 Pro also champions it, but after 3 layers, there are occasional frame drops. Again, this is not something you'll really notice unless you have the two devices side by side or you've used one over the other, but there is a minor benefit of having those additional GPU cores, and of course, having a larger memory bandwidth also helps quite a bit. Now, render times are considerably faster on the M4 Max when compared to a M4 Pro or M chip because of the two additional encoding engines. It's going to vary depending on what you're doing, but in my case, I find that I often make multiple drafts of the footage that I'm editing, and that can stack up to anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes of savings, especially if I'm doing multiple drafts over and over for the same project. I've never really gamed on a Mac in any sort of reasonable capacity, to be very honest with you, because honestly, it's just such a lackluster platform for gaming due to compatibility and optimization. However, I have played a little bit of Valheim on my MacBook, and I gotta tell you, it is a pretty smooth experience, but ultimately it is more optimized working on a gaming laptop or a gaming desktop. But it's good to know you still have the ability to play some pretty top tier games that are compatible with some decent graphical settings. Let's talk about thermals, which again is one of the most impressive parts of this machine. So with the 14-inch chassis, you'll find under an unrealistic peak load with the M4 Max, you can hit a maximum average surface temperature of 41 degrees Celsius. Now, a more realistic sustained load will yield you around 35 degrees Celsius, which is a very respectable and cool number. Even with peak loads running, the fan noise is rarely audible. I mean, the fans are spinning, but they're very quiet to the point where you as an end user will not be able to tell when they're on. And that's ultimately a great thing. In fact, you have to basically measure fan noise and RPM to get any real sense of how fast it might be spinning at any given moment. I know some users have been concerned about whether they should, stick with their 14-inch MacBook Pro or upgrade to a 16-inch one for their next MacBook if they're getting a max level chip. The fact is that the 14-inch MacBook Pro does not thermal throttle for 99% of use cases. A lot of YouTubers and tech reviewers have done extreme tests, and the difference in performance is often less than 2%, which again to me is not a big factor to consider, and I prefer the smaller form factor of the 14-inch MacBook in general. The M4 Max MacBook Pro does feature a 72 watt-hour battery. Apple claims a unreasonable number of 24 hours runtime, while battery life is very impressive on MacBooks with a actual use case of mid-level productivity like video editing, photo editing, watching 4K content. You can expect around 11 to 12 hours of realistic runtime. Of course, if you are doing lighter stuff, that number can easily go up to 17 hours based on our real-world use case. Now, the speaker system on the 14-inch MacBook Pro, while not as impressive on the 16-inch variant, is still totally awesome and beats like 95% of laptops in terms of audio quality. It's got volume, it's got depth, it's got clarity. Here's a quick sound test for reference.
Killer get eat and get buried with the seeds, but that makes me feel free, hella focused on my dreams. I got habits, they're established, I'm doing things a bit manic, but I can handle it. Juggle this, juggle that, struggle here, lose some cash, win and lose, make it back. You can choose your own path, nothing good comes fast, nothing fast ever lasts.
The M4 Max MacBook Pro 14-inch configuration I have here will yield you around $3,900 US, and this video assumes there's no tariffs on the US products at the time anyway. Now, with that said, what I will tell you is that, again, the M4 Max is not really worth it for me. It is worth its price in terms of the performance and quality it offers, I do believe, even with the Apple tax. However, it's not necessarily worth it for us, because even if you have a robust workflow like I do, where you're editing 4K footage, you're doing a lot of editing on Photoshop, often at the same time, you never really truly utilize the CPU and the GPU to its full advantage. I mean, sure, there are subtle benefits with the M4 Max. You have significantly faster render times and slightly better performance in programs like Blender, or where you're using GPU more extensively, but it's not going to be realized until you truly are able to push this laptop well beyond what would be considered everyday or even heavy workflow needs. Now, if you're into machine learning, or if you're running extensive code where you have a lot of requirements running at once, then absolutely you will benefit. Or if you need 3 external displays running at the same time, the M4 Max is kind of going to be a necessity for you. However, for everyone else, the M4 Pro MacBook Pro is more than sufficient. I've reviewed that unit as well. My personal recommendation is save yourself a ton of money and upgrade the storage on the M4 Pro variant if you don't have that external use case. But everything I do was not enough to really push the M4 Max to its limit or even remotely come close. And hopefully that sets some sort of real world gauge for you guys beyond benchmarks and fancy numbers. Let me know what you think of the outgoing MacBook Pro. If you already have one, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And let me know again, do you prefer the glossy display or the nano texture display, or do you prefer the silver color or the more fingerprint magnetic space black color, I believe it's called? Let me know all of that. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed the content, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Catch you in the next one.